So like when the lockdowns and stuff were happening, obviously we didn't have a lot of information at the time. We didn't know if this thing was going to be Ebola or just a freaking flu. But as time started to go on, I mean, I had another medical professional on this podcast last week talk like they started realizing that the jig was up, right? Like something was off.
I have to say, I wasn't one of the first ones to pick up on that. Mine came, I wasn't too far in, but it came a little bit later. So I was sitting watching the news announcements. I was listening to Governor Cuomo every day. And, you know, I know exactly, but he's like, we need critical care help. And like never before during a disaster, like I've always wanted to travel and do that. I've done a couple of mission trips and very rarely do they need an ICU physician. And in this case, they're like, we need ICU docs and nurses to come relieve our team. So I actually signed up to volunteer and I went out for 10 days in April of 2020. I walked into an ICU in Queens, New York. It was just outside the epicenter that you've heard so much about Elmhurst. And I walked into a 22-bed ICU that had 75 vented patients. So it was every bit as bad as they said on the news in that setting at that time. There were 3 freezer trucks outside that they were using for extensions of the morgue. And I was watching more people die every day than I saw die in a month normally.
Now, a lot of people aren't talking about this, but the ventilators and stuff, a lot of people are saying that, you know, that caused a lot of the unnecessary damage with venting these folks. You know, what's your opinion on that matter?
Yeah, I've been pretty vocal about that. I disagree firmly about that. The problem is a lot of people don't understand respiratory physiology. The patients died because they were improperly treated and undertreated, and they had a progressive cytokine storm that damaged their lungs. Well, if you can imagine, the lungs, instead of being healthy balloons that stretch, became wet tissue paper. Well, you put wet tissue paper in front of a fan like the ventilator, which is all it is a fancy fan, and it's going to blow the tissue paper out. The same thing happened to their lungs. The lungs were fragile from the disease process. You know, when you see somebody, if you think about how fast we breathe, and this gets into physiology, but I think people can understand this. As you sit there, you're breathing 10 to 15 times a minute. Try to breathe a breath every 2 seconds. Like you just can't do it. And imagine these people doing this. They were breathing 40, 50, 60 times a minute when they got to us. That is unsustainable. Like that takes so much energy. These people eventually fatigue and just die. That's when they went into cardiac arrest. So we had no other option than to intubate these people that were at that point. Unfortunately, like there's no other option. So I think in 2020, everyone gets a little bit of a pass because we were doing the best we could. But when it came to 21 and the shots came out, that was just a different scenario altogether. Now we knew about the meds and then the hospital started actively blocking them. So that was 2020 is a very different pandemic in my eyes than 21.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially, you know, with people, like I said, everybody gets even the elected officials, they get a get out of jail free card in the beginning. I've always been against the lockdowns, they're unconstitutional and so forth, but everyone was just trying to do their best. And that's why, like, even Governor DeSantis in the beginning, him and Governor Nome started to open up. But Governor Nome never locked down, but Governor DeSantis said, you know what, I'm not locking down ever again. And he came out and apologized and said, you know, I was wrong, but we're never locking up again. And, you know, he just got attacked nonstop. So there was just all this misinformation, and people like me and others were like talking about, you know, building your immune system, and there's other ways. You need to exercise, you need to make sure that you're doing everything you can to become healthy. And we were deplatformed, and we were quacks, and we were spreading misinformation. It was frustrating. So were you on Twitter at this time, you know, when before Elon Musk bought it? Were you getting censored for anything?
Yeah, I sure was. So I wasn't a big